Hi, I'm James Tryon. Today we're going to be talking about getting emails to send with WordPress. I'm the LearnDash training specialist. I've been using WordPress since 2007. I'm the lead organizer at WordCamp Orlando. We'll probably have one this year. If it's not in person, we'll probably be doing it virtually. I'm the ambassador to Wapoos, which is the mascot of WordPress. It's a little yellow guy. I have 3 lovely kids and a wife. I love my family, but I definitely enjoy playing with toys and Transformers more at times. You can follow me on Facebook and Twitter. It's my Twitter name. If you guys have found us via the Facebook group, thanks for hanging out. It's a fantastic group. Thanks for everyone who participates and makes it a lovely community. Today, what we're going to be covering is we're going to be reviewing how WordPress handles emails and crons. We're going to be reviewing how most hosts handle emails. We're going to review lots of resources and really providing lots of links for you guys so everyone can look at those links later. Then we're going to be going over some demos on setting up crons, setting up some SMTP plugins, and making sure that everyone has an option in what we're going to be doing. And then if we have time, we'll be going over the LearnDash notification plugin. But again, we're going to try to keep the presentation to about 30 minutes starting from now. And if we have time, we'll go over that. If not, we'll jump straight to questions. Feel free to ask questions throughout. We'll try to make sure everything's answered at the end. This is being recorded, so if there's anything we don't get to, I'll make sure we get to it later and post it along with the group. The slides should be available as well once the presentation is posted somewhere. Just a heads up though, I don't necessarily see the questions or any comments in front of me just now. So if you do see something, Justin, please feel free to speak up.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm monitoring them here.
Cool. Okay. So emails. Emails in general, I don't want to spend too much time here, but I want to make sure that we know that how important they are. We want to make sure that everything that we are sending is opted in and we have permission to send. But once somebody is actually a student or using our courses, or at least enrolled or interested in our newsletter, you can use emails as touch points, which are going to help raise engagement. If you use them to talk about your community or courses, if you have a membership site, they're great for community involvement. They're good to keep user retention up. So sometimes if you don't have any type of email communication, someone signs up, they never start your course, they drop off, they don't use anything. It comes 6 months later, they haven't even started. If you can send touchpoint emails or encouragement emails, you can then benefit. Their students are going to enjoy it. Maybe they'll talk about it. You know, it's the whole marketing side. But also, there's one little benefit here. When you're sending emails that have to do with completing courses or purchases or check-in points that are scheduled and asked for that are part of what you're doing, you could also include little reminders or upsells or possible swag options if you're selling t-shirts or anything that goes along with that, or course upsells. And that's allowed. It's not considered spam when it's attached to a receipt or part of an order or completion of a quiz. So you could use emails to even spread some of that extra updates. So the big difference right now and what's going on is you have something called PHP mail versus SMTP. Actually, what I mean is there's 2 major problems with WordPress email in the system that we have right now. And problem's a little bit a harsh word. It's just the way that it's set up and code's evolved and technology has changed. You have the problem of handling email, which is the PHP mail version or an SMTP version, or you have something called a system cron or a WP Cron. And we'll talk more about that more in a minute. First, I want to go back to the emails, but I wanted to highlight that these are the 2 major problems. If you ever have an email not sending, I can promise you 98% of the time, it's going to be either something to do with your PHP mail or SMTP mail or your crons. So we'll come back to the crons and let's talk a little bit about the email. So PHP actually means hypertext processor, but if you go back really far, it probably means personal homepage, but that's really not important. But the thing is, every server has the ability to send send email through PHP. PHP is the language that sits on the server, and it can just send. The problem is when you host on a managed host, or you're hosting on a shared environment, or you're hosting on your own system that you built from scratch, nobody knows who you are or where those IP addresses came from. And those IP addresses probably belong to someone else before you, and you have no idea what they did with them. So most cases, most email clients will just sort of block that stuff. Send it to spam, won't deliver it, or just turn it off. It's not that it's a problem, it's just as we evolved, people have taken advantage of those things and they become at least not as dependent as they used to. So how do you get around that? We use SMTP, or Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. You can leverage a third-party plugin. You can leverage your email that you already have. It's way more reliable. Sometimes you can use some free options. It might cost a little more, but it's also going to provide you with a lot of extra things that come along with a verified email. For one thing, it's every time you send an email with images, that email is not going to come up as possibly dangerous. In fact, it might even load those images depending on the client. So you gain a lot of trust when you have an SMTP client. You can really control the. Actually, if you get a lot of email going to spam, using an SMTP plugin is going to really prevent most of the spam. Now, if you really are sending spammy emails, you're going to get marked as spam. But for the most part, this will fix most of your problems. Okay, WP Cron. Now, I want to talk a little bit about this. We're not going to go into detail. If you want to know more about it, feel free to check out this link. There's two major differences between a WP Cron and a system cron. System crons, or just a normal cron, were first. WP Cron came along when WordPress came along. So the major difference is WP Cron triggers on page load or events. So meaning, if no one goes to your site, you're not going to trigger any WP crons. Or if you have a lot of people visiting your site, you're triggering too many crons. Now, you can set some small triggers that will help run these and help manage that. But for the most part, that's what's happening. Normal system crons run, you can say, I want this to run every 5 minutes. I want this to run every day. I want this to run every week. And you can see here, this is a link to some information on how you can actually set your cron. We'll do this a little later, but you can see here how you can set it and how you want it to be set for week, month, year, how often you want these things to run. So this runs based on time. The WordPress one will run based off of actions. So you can see how that might cause problems. That also causes problems with timing. So let's say you want to automatically send drip campaigns, and your students are saying, I'm not getting my content. Well, that's probably because the cron isn't firing in time, or your host has turned off WordPress default crons and you haven't set something else up. So that's the gist of how crons work. And next up is we want to know who to blame. My email isn't working. What's going on? Well, I don't want to be blamed. So let's figure this out. There's a couple plugins you can use, and we'll go over this, and actually you can see them in a moment. I apologize, I didn't get the logos in. But we have a plugin called WP Mail Logging and Check Email. So WP Mail Logging, what that does is it logs an event every time an email is sent from the system. So you can see that it's sent, or you can see that it failed. You can see what happened and make sure that it's leaving WordPress, it's leaving LearnDash because of a trigger, it's leaving WooCommerce because of an order. You can see that these things are actually being accomplished. and that means they're leaving you and they're not getting to your end user. So what does that mean? How do we fix that? Secondly, is check email. So this one actually lets you send a test email to make sure things are working. So instead of waiting for a test order or going through and filling out a contact form, you can literally just click a button, make sure it's working. And then this is a bonus tip. This is one of my favorite plugins. It's called Simple History. This is one of the first things I do. I'll show this a little later if we have time. But I install this first, and it tracks everything that happens, every change that happens, every update, who did it, when it happened, all of that, and tracks it on a log. So in case something happens or changes, I know why or where, and I can kind of track that down and help troubleshoot. That's a bonus tip that doesn't really have to do with email, but it's nice to use. Okay, so I said earlier, using an SMTP plugin. We're going to go over these quickly because as I talk about the hosts in a moment, they actually all reference these, so I figured we should talk about these first. Now, there's other players out there, but all of our recommended hosts that we'll talk about in a moment actually mention these in their documentation. Some of them, all of them, some of them, but all in all, these are a pretty good starting point. So what these companies do is they act like an email server for you, or almost like a SaaS that'll send everything for you. They act like a middleman. They're going to block some spam. They're going to make sure that who is ever signing up or sending things is legit for the most part. Sort of like a MailChimp. Some of them will even offer some of that. Some of those features of a marketing company. In fact, there's like one of them that I don't have listed here called Mandrill, which is actually owned by MailChimp, I believe. Could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure on that. So now the couple here, Mailgun, SparkPost, SendGrid. To be upfront, I use SendGrid. I think they're great. There's also a free option here for anyone who doesn't want to spend any money right away. Now, none of these are affiliate links, but I have only used the SendGrid. For Mailgun, you can get 5,000 emails per month for the first 3 months for free. And then you can start on a plan that's 80 cents per 1,000 emails. And they have a WordPress plugin that'll handle that. And I want to come back to this WordPress plugin thing in a moment. Then you have SparkPost, free to start, $20 a month for the first 50,000. And then they're 20 cents more than Mailgun. And then SendGrid is free up to 100 a day, and then it's $15 a month for 60,000 emails. Now, if you send 60,000 emails, it's actually $25 a month, but it's up to 60,000 for $14.95. Now, the thing that I said about the plugins, let me go back. All of these plugins seem buggy. You're better off using a standalone SMTP plugin that ties into one of their services. And personally, at this point, I would recommend the next SMTP plugin we'll talk about, and I'd use a SendGrid account for the ease of use. Here's a helpful tip. You want to make sure that you have DMARC policies set up to help fight spam. Any of the SendGrid, Mandrill, any of those services are going to do this for you. They're going to make sure you're adding a proper from field. They're going to make sure that the emails are being routed properly. If anything bounces, it's going to be handled correctly. And by doing this, by making sure you're using a service that offers DMARC, you're going to make sure that you're not being marked as spam. This is just an extra tip. Feel free to research this on your own. WP Engine had a great article, even though this could be anywhere in any service. Okay, so the plugin that I was talking about earlier that I would recommend with SendGrid is the WP Mail SMTP. Now, the reason I have the Post SMTP plugin here as well is it's a very good plugin. They're both good. They both have over 300,000 plus installs. The top one has double that, if not more. But the bottom one, the Post SMTP plugin, gives you the ability to leverage SMTP with your Gmail username and password only. The only problem with that is, versus an authentication or an OAuth app, is if you ever change your password or you leave the company or you move on, all your email could stop working and you're dependent on your one password. So that becomes an issue, but it's also a pretty easy solution if you're a small shop or you don't want to worry with it right now. You can install the post SMTP, log in like you're usually logging in with Gmail, and you're practically done. There is other ways to do it, but the other ways are a little longer. So we'll actually go over a demo of the WP Mail SMTP in a moment, so we're not going to go into too much right now. Okay, a popular host. You can find all of our popular hosts at popular hosts for LearnDash on this link. We're going to go over all of these really fast. Feel free to go back and look at all this documentation. Now, I use several of these hosts, and they all are good in their own way. I'm not trying to pick favorites, but I want to go over some quick info. Okay, SiteGround, this is their cron information, and this is where you find their SMTP information. You can do all of this on your own through cPanel. Oh, and their managed WordPress hosting, same interface. For WP Engine, here's their cron link, here's their SMTP information, and here's how you set it up for Mailgun, SendGrid, and Gmail. Now, this can happen at any point, 24 hours a day, but you will have to ask for their help. I recommend using the chat. It'll take 5 minutes, and you can turn on and do whatever you need to do with any of these chat stuff. I also highly recommend asking any of these hosts for help. They all have chat support, or most of them do. They're all very willing to help with this. They do this type of thing all the time. And in their documentation, it even states you can ask for help if you want. So feel free to actually reach out to them. But here is their documentation. Kinsta, same thing, cron, SMTP information. The docs say you can do it all yourself. Liquid Web. Now, SMTP, this one was a little weird. I have not used their managed WordPress hosting environment yet. I've only used their shared cPanel stuff in the past. They also offer email hosting. I'm not sure how that works. Their high-end web hosting is pretty expensive. You probably have a rep. They'll help you. I know it'll work. They'll have options. I was just a little confused on the platform and which direction. If you're using them for LearnDash, you're on the higher end plans, and they have an option. It was just a little bit based on their old configuration. More again, we have Cron's SMTP information, Pantheon, same thing. Now, the interesting thing about Pantheon, they want you to use a third-party cron management service. They don't really encourage you to do anything in there, and it's locked down. You can't. You can manipulate the WP Cron, but you can't manipulate third-party crons. They want you to use a service. 2 of these services are free. One of them's $20 a year. I have not used any of these, but honestly, I haven't had much of an issue with WP Cron on Pantheon. Same thing, they don't control email, but they highly recommend SendGrid. Okay, demo, cool. Okay, so the thing that we want to do first is I want to show everyone how to set a cron. I want to do this in SiteGround because it's pretty easy. I set up a site today, not promoting SiteGround, but they are running a COVID-19 special right now, if you would call it that. It's 99 cents for 3 months. That plan they're offering for 99 cents is not something I would recommend for LearnDash, but for trying it out, understanding their infrastructure, using their host environment for that price, it's a pretty good price. So I bought a site this morning and checked it out. So I want to go down to Dev, and I want to go to cron job. They actually have some things already set. Now, one thing I'll say is we have documentation here. It says, it says what to do on their documentation. On all of those links I said, where it said cron, and all the hosts, they say what to do. SiteGround tells you to do this. If we're going to go back and look at, just the default, how you might want to do it, it's going to look a little bit different per host. So please read the documentation on exactly how to do this. But it was really easy. The link pretty much said copy this and paste it in. So you copied this link from their documentation, and then I set what I wanted it to be, like during the actual intervals of what I wanted it to be. So what I did was pasted it in, and then I said I want this to be twice an hour. I hit create, and that was it. Honestly, when I did that, emails instantly started sending on my brand new site today.
Yeah, I think, James, I want to just pause again to reiterate this one, how easy that was. This is what, when people write us about having issues with emails, this is what a lot of our support folks will point them to. It can seem intimidating, I guess, at first, because you think, oh, I got to do something on my server. But as James pointed out, it's just as easy on other hosts as well. It's like a copy and paste, and suddenly you're setting up these cron jobs that are kicking out emails more reliably than what you currently have if you're using the default setup.
Yeah, let me just load up SiteGround's site so everyone can just see how clear it is. Oh, there's one more thing we're going to have to do, which I forgot about. But this is the instructions. You have to make sure that you disable the WP Cron, which is true, and then we're going to set the cron, which is a copy of this line, and we pasted it in. That was it. Now, what I'm about to do, I do not recommend. I would make sure that any changes done to a server were done through a proper version control in a testing environment and moved up from test to production. But I'm going to go ahead and set this to off. So I'm going to go over here to my dashboard. I'm inside my new SiteGround site from today. I go to public HTML. I want to click on my WP config file. Scroll fast so no one sees anything. Okay. So it's right here. I added this earlier for testing purposes, and I had it commented out. But you'll see where it says, that's it, stop editing, happy publishing. It tells you don't paste it right above there. So if you haven't done anything in your WP config file, it's going to be around line 65 to 70, depending on your host environment. And just define disable WP cron true, hit save. Now that's it. Now the cron's going to work. It's just going to trigger. Now it's going to trigger every 30 minutes. So in case something is stuck in your server or a WP cron isn't firing, it will now get triggered every half hour. So this will still run the WP crons, but it's going to make sure they're running on a constant basis based off of your new system cron. I hope that makes sense to everyone. If not, feel free to ask, and we'll talk about it again. So I just turned off the WP cron by default. I turned on the system one, and I set it to run every 30 minutes. Following the documentation, it took me 5 minutes. Cool. So let's go back to the presentation. So the next thing I want to talk about is SMTP plugins. First off, I'm going to also install a couple. I'll show you guys that. I'll show everyone that. So in this site, I went in and I want to go ahead and install and make sure they're all turned on, the plugins I talked about earlier. They're already there. This is the post SMTP plugin. This is a good one if you want to log in directly with your Gmail account. I would not use that right now. There's a SendGrid account plugin too. It's very outdated. It gets like a 3 out of 5. I wouldn't mess with it, but in a good environment, I have used it, but I would probably avoid it for right now. So I want to turn off this SMTP one. Actually, I'm just going to leave it on so we don't have any problems. I know what I'll do. I can set it to default so I don't have to turn it off. Cool. So the two plugins I talked about earlier were the logging plugin and the test send plugin. Now, if you were to upgrade this WP Mail SMTP plugin, they do have a logging function, but the other plugin seems to be just fine. And as you can see all the testing earlier, it actually does log them. You can see what's being sent, how it looked. You can see that the test worked. You can see the status every time, the timestamp, who sent it, the IP address in which it's sent. So you can see that it's actually is sending email, and you can know, okay, it's not WordPress, it's not WooCommerce. I need to look a little further. And how you can see that those things are being sent is with this check email plugin. So do a quick send email. It's going to say it's successfully sent. If I come back over here and I refresh the log, I can see that it's sent. Let me check my phone real fast.
As you're checking your phone, James, I'll just point out that this stuff is really good to have, not just when you're setting up email, but just to have in general, because, you know, life happens and sometimes emails may stop sending, and you can look at the logs and see exactly where that may have happened. And that helps in troubleshooting if you have to talk to your host, and you can share with them, okay, you know, on this date at this time, that was the last email that was sent. And that'll really help you get back up and running a lot quicker.
Yep, and it sent perfectly fine. And that was all just because of the cron at the default settings on a good host. So let's go and look at the WP SMTP plugin. And if there's some questions or anything that comes up, feel free to like interrupt or talk. This is the last major section. I want to look at 3 different options, but I do see that we're running a little over on time. I also know that we did also have the hiccup at first. So. Okay, so this is the WP Mail SMTP plugin. And like what I said earlier, I would recommend SendGrid, and I would use this plugin. This plugin seems to be better maintained than all of the Mailgun, SendGrid, all of the others that do this than their actual plugins. So, so by default, so let's go ahead and look at this SMTP. So let's say your email is not a Google Apps. You bought SiteGround, they give you free email, so you're using that. So I want to set up my SMTP base email that I'm using without Google Apps. So you want to make sure your from email is the proper from email. And I'm assuming that you either set up your own email address just for the site, or you're going to be using your own. And this is set up on earlier today on with a free email account. I went into SiteGround, added the email, and then you can see all the settings right here that you're going to need. Email configuration. And then if I click on this new email, I can hover over this 3 dots and it's going to say mail configuration. This is really any email configuration that you use. Gmail would have the same thing, Hotmail, whoever, maybe not Hotmail, but whoever your email client is, they're going to give you these settings. And this is the information you're actually going to need to set up the actual plugin. So we'll come back to that. You have the actual from name, who it is, and as long as this stuff is real and legit, it's going to also help blocking you from spam. Make sure you have a real name, make sure you have your email addresses all set up correctly. And then according to, my screen is a little small, I apologize, I'm on a larger screen. According to SiteGround, my SMTP server is just the LearnDash.academy. I want SSL for safety. It automatically set it to 465, which is the same port. I made sure that these were all set, but honestly, 465, these two are already set. And then I just put in my email address and my password. Now, I do not recommend leaving this like that. This is not a safe input. If you go back to the WP config and define your password, it'll make it safer. But for testing purposes and for this throwaway email, I'm not too worried about it right now. That is probably the level of the farthest you're going to have to go on the level of dev, is making sure that you can get that to your WP config, just like we did with and turned off the cron. You can put those right next to that.
Yeah, and if you don't want to mess with it, you can contact your host and just say, hey, can you add these to the WP config? And then just kind of complete your password part in there, and you're good to go.
Yep. So I'm going to close this, and I want to hit save. And now I'm no longer using the default system. I'm using my SiteGround email SMTP. Now I'm doing that. I know for sure that my email is going to send. So I'm going to come over here. They also have a test tab. So if you don't want to use the other test email plugin and you can get it to work with the cron, you don't have this, that's fine. So some of these plugins are a little overlapping, but they kind of build off each other based off of the situations that you're working on. So I want to send this to myself again. Make sure it goes to my phone because that's a quicker internet connection. It says it was sent successfully. Check my phone real fast. And there it is, sent almost instantly.
Perfect. Hey, James, one question came in. I want to make sure that we address it because I could see a point of confusion. When we were setting up the cron stuff prior to showing this plugin, is that necessary for this plugin, or are those two separate activities?
Oh, no. Yeah, I should have clarified that. Those are two separate activities. Most time your email are sending. So the only time you want to mess with a cron is if your emails take forever or something should have happened, or sometimes you get 5 emails at once, that type of thing. What happens is the WP cron isn't being triggered in time, or it gets stuck. And when you set the WP cron, it's going to make sure that that never gets stuck. But if you're in a good environment, or you're not having that issues, or you have steady traffic, most people won't have to mess with a cron. So that is really like just a worst case scenario if the other isn't working, or it might be a quick fix first, depending on how tech savvy you are. It's just a sort of like a pulse check, if you will. Like it's not a super important thing, but it also could be a quick fix and you can move on with your day. But definitely, you don't need both of them. Does that make sense? I hope so.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think generally, despite the fact that you can do those system crons, many people find this a little bit more user-friendly, just kind of installing the plugin, entering in some of their credentials, signing up for something like a SendGrid or Mailgun, and moving on from there. Because, I mean, these whole companies, that's what they do. Their business is making sure your emails get delivered. So it's a smart choice if you're looking for reliability.
Yeah, and the hosts don't want to get in trouble. They don't want to get blacklisted. And if you're in a shared environment, they don't want one person jeopardizing everyone. So when you go to a third-party service, it's going to be a way better level of service. Most hosts will actually use an account like this. I know a lot of them will actually use a SendGrid account to make sure all the system emails send, and then give you a cap. They won't tell you what the cap is. But if you're sending hundreds a week, they're going to not send. But if you're sending a couple a day, it's going to be within that cap. So you're like, I know WP Engine does that. They use SendGrid to make sure the reset passwords work, and the new user emails all send. So what's cool about SendGrid is it's free for $100 a day and $15 a month, up to $59,999. Now, the only problem with $100 a day is that can go fast if you're sending them on course completions or anything like that. The nice thing is, all you actually have to do is have an API key. So unlike this, where you have to have a couple different settings and passwords and all that, SendGrid, you just need your API key. Now, in order to make SendGrid work, though, you do have to authorize your domain. So you would have to say authorize domain. You would put in whoever you're hosted with. Like I'll say I'm with Namecheap, and hit next. And then I want to say the domain is and then it's going to give me the CNAME and the value. So what a CNAME and a value is, that has to go into where your DNS is. And the DNS, my DNS, is at SiteGround. Sometimes it's usually where you're hosting. Sometimes it's where your register is. So it's either at your register, or where you're by your domain, or it's where your host is. And sometimes that's the same. So let me show you these real fast. So we're going to go to domain, DNS zone editor, CNAME. So what I did is, you can see this EM for the first half of this. You notice it says dot and then the domain, my fake domain, because this is already verified. So you would put the first couple characters here, up to the period. You would say when you want it. I always click as soon as I can because I'm impatient. And then you resolve it to here. So you copy this, paste it in, copy this, paste it in, next. Copy, paste, create. I did that 3 times. That was it. Once I did that the 3 times, I come out over here to email API. And I pretty much just created a new one. Now I might be clicking the wrong spot here, so I want to make sure I have the right area. But when you're doing the process, it'll give you the next step. So I don't want to overspeak here, but you really are just going to the email API. After you verify it, it's going to give you, here we go. Also, let me go back to this plugin, because I know this seems a little bit daunting, but there's a link right here. So if you just click this link and you have a SendGrid account, so this is what I recommend. Sign up for SendGrid, come back here, verify your email, your actual email, and then verify the domain, and then click this link. It's going to ask you to create a key. You give it full access, create and view. That's your key. You copy this, you paste it here, you hit save, you're sending emails. So copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste. Click this link, get the key, paste it, save it. So that's all you got to do. Now, Gmail, this is a much longer process. If you want to use Gmail, I recommend using the other one if you want to do it quickly. If you have the time, I don't want to go over this right now because there's a couple long tutorials that are just 10 minutes alone on this process. But the WP Beginner article right here is a step-by-step on how to do it. I'll be happy to link an article in here, a video on how to do it as well if someone wants to see. If you really want to use Gmail, the other SMTP plugin is a much quicker solution. But again, if your password changes, you have to change it. This is setting up an OAuth authentication, setting up client IDs, and a little app. It is still limited. So even though this is a much longer process to set up Gmail, it is limited. They're not going to allow you to send too many. And once you reach the limit, Gmail's services or Google Apps services get quite expensive. I would recommend going SendGrid or Mailgun or something like that before going that route with Google. But quick, easy solution in a pinch. Use the other SMTP plugin and log in like you would log in with any other Google Apps account. Any questions on that? I will be happy to go into detail or make a separate video, but that'll take about 10 minutes. Okay, that's the presentation. Ran over really fast. Really quick LearnDash notifications. Recommend it. You can send emails, you can manage emails, you can create notifications for all these triggers. It's like the classic editor. You can use short codes, you can create and design whatever you want based off of those lessons and critiques and scores, and trigger those on any of these things and send those to your clients. That's a quick pitch for LearnDash notifications add-on. I highly recommend it as long as your SMT plugins are set up and configured. One last trick tip. If WordPress is sending from WordPress at your company name, this is another little quick function. You can use a snippet. I don't recommend snippets. I recommend putting it in a child theme or a custom plugin that's your functions for your brand only. But these little filters, you can change the company name, email address, name, all of that stuff that's sending from the default WordPress email system. And that's our presentation. So
yeah, James, thank you so much for covering that. And I know folks are interested probably more in the notifications. Let us know just as in feedback if that's something you want us to cover. We certainly can set up another presentation on that. We like to keep these a little snappy. This, your head might be spinning at some points through this process, but if you just take a moment and look at, and you can revisit this presentation later because we're recording it. It's actually just a few steps. I think James was just going into each one in different detail and kind of showing you the various options with each step if you wanted. But setting up email is fairly simple to do, and if you ever get stuck, the hosts can help you set it up because that's what they do all the time. Probably the most user-friendly will be a plugin like this because they'll have their own documentation if you don't want to mess with setting up anything from the system side like a cron job. But that is a topic that we get asked quite often, and we wanted to make sure that we had something, a presentation for you that you can, well, thank you for attending now, or you can revisit at a later point. There's some questions coming in. I want to make sure we get to them. So James, one is why should they use a popular SMT plugin if they can use their website SMTP? Does that make sense?
Well, they can. Well, so you use this plugin to leverage your website's SMTP settings. So there's one that says other SMTP, and you can. So the process of me earlier, feel free to go back and rewatch this a little later when I was going over the SiteGround settings. That is the other SMTP, or exactly what you were just saying. Now, there was a lot in here, but I really went over 4 or 5 separate unique ways to do it based off of how someone might want to do it. If you're using a Google Apps or using your own email through the host or using a third-party system like SendGrid. So there was 3 main different ways. So I know that seems very daunting all at once, but if you look at them in small chunks, it really is as simple as username, password, your domain, and making sure that you're verified some DNS records if you go that route.
Perfect. A couple questions here one from Johan. I understand that using Mailgun is better than SMTP from the hosting provider. So I think he maybe has heard that. Do you find that to be true, or is it kind of apples and oranges?
Well, not everyone uses email from their host provider. So like I personally always use like a Google Apps, and if you're a nonprofit, you can get Google Apps for free. So a lot of times I'll use them in their settings, but even those can be limited. So when you use a third-party service like Mailgun or SendGrid, most times they have a pretty low level that's free, and you're going to get that added support of making sure that you're always come in as a trusted email. It's going to help make sure that it's going to help you fight any type of blacklisting. If someone reports you of spamming, they're going to help you and be on your side to help fight that. So you get the added benefit of using an email client because that's their job. And now I would trust the Gmail SMTP settings, but the one that I just set up on SiteGround, no offense to SiteGround, but that is a free email that I'm using. And if I send everything through that, chances are it might get clogged up a little bit, especially with a limited memory size. And if I'm started sending design comps or something like, so using the premium services, or at least the free version of the premium services, it just gets you a little bit added extra level of security and deliverability, and to help prevent blacklisting.
Yeah, and speaking of security, this question came in during when you were demoing the password for this plugin, and you said you wouldn't recommend putting your password in. I think if you scroll to the bottom of that page, you said, yeah, I wouldn't recommend it. You know, follow these instructions to make it more secure. Can you elaborate on maybe why the default way isn't so secure and what that extra step does to make your password more secure?
Yeah, so I think the plugin really is just trying to reach for the masses and trying to help everyone. So they stated itself that this password is stored in plain text. So that's probably because it's stored in plain text. It's tied to whatever the settings are to the API to send out and receive email. The danger with that is if you were to get hacked and then someone gets into your database and they look at their input, they can see your password. So right now it just is encrypted and it's just little dots because this input has a type of password on it. You know, it's not really an encrypted password right now. So when you take it and you define it and you add it here, it's no longer storing it in the database. Now, to be fair, it is storing it in your WP config file in plain text too, but you would have to get into the files, and getting into the files is usually a little harder than getting into the database for hackers or bugs or bots. So the question is, the developers of this plugin have this input storing as a plain text input. And they let you know they don't recommend it. They recommend moving it here. Now, another reason it might be here, testing. What if you just want to make sure it works before you move it over to your WP config? So
okay, that's great to know. And the last question we'll take here, and it's kind of interest considering what we've been getting in the comments, and it's about the notifications add-on, and we are actually updating it at the present. It's going through QA, adding some new features and some new triggers as well. But for example, we want to make sure that these notifications that people have the ability to opt out of them more easily. So we're adding in that particular setting and some other things. So the short answer is yes, we're doing some QA right now. We're going to be kicking out an update to the notifications add-on. That's why we're doing these webinars around the topics of email. It just seems pretty timely. So keep an eye out for that. And with that, I want to thank everybody for joining us. We like to keep this nice and short so you can have your day back or your evening back. And keep an eye on the Facebook group for more webinars that are coming up. If you have any suggestions, please, please, please post them in the Facebook group. We're watching them. This webinar came from the Facebook group. So with that said, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Have a great day.
Thank you.